I'm Kate Adler. I'm the director of the library here at Metropolitan College, and we are here to celebrate the first month of our 3-month celebration of Black History Month. Every year, the library celebrates Black history, heritage, culture, and life in January, as well as in February. And this year, we're going to continue those conversations through March. And this is also, we're sort of exploring a brown bag lunchtime kind of model, and we're going to see how that goes for the first 2 of these events. And we're beginning the series by talking about mentorship. Maya Angelou said, in order to be a mentor and an effective one must care. You must care. You don't have to know how many square miles are in Idaho. You don't need to know what is the chemical makeup of chemistry or of blood or water. Know what you know and care about the person. Care about what you know and care about the person you're sharing with. I think this sort of speaks to some of what was kind of coming through to me in our conversation just now, Austin, about these sort of webs of care in which we kind of have one another's back in life, and hopefully in this community at MCNY. And in the spirit of mentorship and informal learning of community care, that I think Maya Angelou is referencing there, is the heart of what I like to think that, to sort of toot our horn, libraries can be about: a space of informal learning, of informal care, community care. And it's also a thread that runs through the whole story of MCNY. And so I want to just give you a little sense of our interest in centering this topic today. It grew out of a convergence of a few things. One is shout out to Michael Goodwin, ongoing conversations with Professor Michael Goodwin, who's on this call today, who, as you may know, has been spearheading a dialogue about men of color in higher education. And to support that urgent dialogue, we in the library established a special collection on that subject. But we wanted to broaden that out a little bit, so it includes mentorship. So we've been thinking about it and framing kind of mentorship in our space, along with that, having kind of a collection that's devoted to that subject.
Right.
MCNY's peer mentorship program is run out of the Learning Commons, a space that the library shares with the Learning Enhancement Center, our writing and math tutors. So a plug out for peer mentorship. If you want to be a mentor, or if you would like to find a mentor, reach out to us, mentoring@mcny.edu. And 3, and most obviously, most importantly, our own Greg Lewis, who is the centerpiece of today's conversation, is a graduate of MCNY's undergrad and graduate business programs, longtime library staffer, and he has this amazing story. In the 1980s, Greg established a mentor program in Bushwick, Brooklyn. It is a wonderful case study in what mentorship is all about and what it can mean in Black and Brown communities and in the lives of young people. And so, I don't know, to me, this is a topic that feels aligned with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., whose memory we honor every January. So it seemed like a good place to start. So I'll turn to you, Greg. Do you want to start by introducing yourself?
Hello, everyone. For those who don't know me, Gregory Lewis. I am longtime library assistant. Reason for being here, to help. But I must admit one thing right off the bat. Until about a year ago, I never thought of myself as a mentor. In fact, I probably still don't think that. I did something to help.
So how would you define mentorship?
I never thought about it at all. I think I tell you the story about a William Gates, a gentleman who played basketball with us when I was a kid in Bushwick. And what stuck out about him was that here's a 40-year-old man who was beating 13, 14, 15-year-old kids every weekend. Like we didn't know how to play the game. And we found out later he had been a classmate of Bill Russell, and at one time, a backup center for the Boston Celtics. He, I guess, would be our mentor. He taught us the game, kept us focused on that so we wouldn't be running the streets. I shouldn't say but my experience with what we call mentoring now is based on him, to honor him. But we were just looking for a way to go back to our old neighborhood, because there was about 10 of us at the time, who had moved on to different areas of our lives, go back to our old neighborhood, see what it was like. And I don't know how many people are familiar with Bushwick. Growing up there, it was Black, Latino, Irish, Jewish, and everybody got along. In 70s and 80s, it was predominantly Black and Latino, and drugs that hit the area hard. I still have a lot of friends there who are suffering. And I couldn't help them. I could go back and help their kids just to get them off the corner. You know, no more standing in front of the bodega. No more hanging out at pool halls with old men listening to their stories. Come listen to my story. There's a place, again, if you're familiar with Bushwick, Moffett and Bushwick Avenue, there was a senior citizen home. They had a basement they allowed us to rent for $100 a month. For the first 4 or 5 years of my life there, we called it the basement and just walked around the neighborhood and found the kids hanging on the corners, sitting in the park late at night, smoking herb, and said, here's a place to go. You don't need to be out in the cold. You don't need to be standing on the corner. Just come here, talk to us, or just be out of the cold. We put in every one of the old books I ever had, a used pool table, a stereo that my father gave me when I was 14, and said, this is a place to hang. And I guess 5 years into it, maybe 6 years, a friend of mine who speaks several languages, including Swahili, told me about Uzuri, which is beautiful, intelligent, and engaging. And we changed the name from the basement to Uzuri Academy. We called it A Beautiful Mind. For 16 years, I have had the pleasure of meeting, talking to, reading to, shooting pool with, and playing basketball with a good 500 or 600 kids. And it was, outside of my having children myself, one of the best experiences of my life. But I never thought about it being a mentorship until Kate said this to me last year. Where it went, I can tell you that I know at least 300 young men who went back and got their equivalency diplomas and wound up going to college or military. I can tell you about a good 200 women who are in the workforce now and out of the neighborhood. And that to me was all we did. You guys want to call it mentorship, fine. I call it helping out my own neighborhood, giving back.
That part right there.
What are you thinking, Lawson?
You know, when you started talking about mentorship, it kind of really touched on like where I'm at right now. So I grew up between Queens and Staten Island, in a middle class to upper middle class family, and I lived in Charlotte for 2 years, Charlotte, North Carolina, and returned to New York. And I said, you know, I want to move to the Bronx. And everybody's like, you want to go to the Bronx? Why do you want to go to the Bronx? Like, it was like, you know, the worst place I could ever go. I own a co-op, and I just noticed that, you know, within my building, there was a divide from inside the four walls to what was going on outside of my neighborhood. And it was kind of like the people that lived in my building had this disdain for everything outside and the people, right? And the one thing my dad told me, and you know, not just to tell the whole story, but in a nutshell, he was basically like, don't ever call anyone a bum and don't ever judge anyone, right? Because you don't know their story, right? Because we all have stories. And he touched on something, and it's like about having a sense of community, right? And if there's no one there to lift you up, right? How do you get to the next step? You know, and a lot of these young people in Black and brown neighborhoods, they don't have anybody there lifting them up. They don't have anybody there encouraging them or telling them that their life is important, you know? And I believe that, you know, we have to be the catalyst to do that in our own communities. And I think that's something that we've lost. You know what I mean? Like in my neighborhood, I know I go out and I talk to, you know, have conversations with the young guys that I see them outside, and You know, I know all of them. I even have some of my neighbors like looking at me like, why are you talking about? You know what I mean? But it's like, if it takes one person to make change, you know, and if you want change in your own community, you know, you have to make a concerted effort to do it, you know. And I do realize there are a lot of new people moving into this community that it might be a cultural difference or view, and they just like, oh, this is like this is like this. But what are we doing to make the change, and how are we bringing everyone together? Because just like you want something for this community, the people who've already been here want something for this community. But how do you know unless you talk to them and get to know them? You know what I mean? So it just all falls into, you know, being a mentor. And he kind of touched on it when he said community, you know? So I think it's really about having a sense of community and understanding that when we build things, we build them together, not individually.
Does anyone else have any thoughts about what mentorship means in their neighborhoods right now or their lives right now?
If I may jump in, you know, I applaud Greg for everything he did with that, and just doing it just out of not necessarily for recognition, or it's just really, I just want to be here to help out. I just want to be here to play a role or play a part in someone's development or someone's life, you know. And sometimes the mentorship, as it comes in so many different forms and fashions, you know, it's really just being or having someone to give advice, someone to give guidance, someone to show there's options, and here are some options. You know, I grew up in Brooklyn, and back then, you know, you look at role models, and not to date myself, but the primary drug at that time was heroin. So it was like, you know,
was this like the 60s?
As I said, not to date myself. So, you know, but, you know, so you had the, you know, drug dealers, as you know, still even in the 80s, you know, had the big cars and all the fancy stuff. So they were not necessarily mentors, but, you know, they were looked at like, wow, how did they get that? How I want that. You know, and that was the example, that was the image that was seen, you know. And then you had to have those who were older, who had experiences maybe that went down that road and can share their challenges. Some who avoided that road, sometimes it's the saying, well, if you haven't traveled the road, how can you tell me about it? How about telling me how you did not travel the road? You know, because you have just as much insight because you didn't get caught up into that, you know. So it's very valuable on either end. You know, and, you know, in my life, I say, you know, I grew up without my dad. So my brother was a huge influence to me. You know, my older brother, you know, my mother, who, you know, as well, you know. But you have, you know, for me, it's just looking at people, you know, who have made a difference in a positive way, who have, you know, shown, you know, how they, you know, endured certain challenges in their lives, the methods in their lives, you know, and how they got out of it, or how they continued to press forward, you know. So for me, you know, it's looking at your community, looking at people in your community, and for me also giving back. You know, I am very strong in an advocate of giving back. People ask me what it is I do. I said I provide a service. I help people get from point A to point B. I help people move forward in some form of fashion in their life. You know, and like Greg, you know, that's mentoring. Okay, that's just me understanding that people need, you know, adults and young adults. You know, some people need some guidance. Some people need some, you know, information, some insight, some exposure to a world maybe outside of theirs. You know.
Does anyone else have that? That's wonderful. Thank you, Michael.
The
Yeah, I was
interesting
gonna say,
thing
just
for me,
to clarify
nobody cut
this,
anybody off.
is this about finding a mentor or becoming a mentor?
Well, the purpose of this talk is just Greg telling us about his experience and for us to just chat about mentorship. And this bit about finding a mentor, becoming a mentor is a plug from me, on my part, to, if you want to do either be a mentor or find a mentor at MCNY, let me know. That's
Okay.
because we
I
have a
was
peer
gonna say
mentor.
I definitely would like to find a mentor, but I'm similar to Greg, like pretty much all my life. I have helped people, get from one point to another point and not think of it as being mentor. As I, grew up, I always had the need to want to help people. So I actually went into human services, and I currently, deal with people with disabilities. So I have seen, where I have helped people with, challenges like gain certain independence, and not be able to depend on others. But I never, like I said, I never looked at it as being mentor, but, it did help somebody to, gain their independence and do things on their own. So,
Yeah.
yeah, pretty
I'm,
much.
I'm curious about this idea of the word and how it may or may not be useful. And I'm wondering, if in certain circumstances it is useful, because, in the context of what Greg is talking about, that's a deliberate space. It's a deliberate, there was a lot that went into curating this space for spontaneous life to happen and spontaneous connection to happen. And I wonder if that word, maybe whether in the context of what Greg was talking about or in any relationship, sometimes can do the work of kind of adding an intentionality and a frame and connecting to a legacy of people thinking about that relationship. And, I think that, if you think of yourself as a mentor, I imagine one feels a certain responsibility that one might not in another sort of circumstance. And then on the other hand, maybe sometimes it's too big or not useful a word. But I think it's interesting in this context, because part of what we're talking about is Greg's space, which I'd like to get back to thinking a little bit about that, of these like informal spaces and these informal relationships where something important nevertheless happens. And then how do you foster that, and how do you care for it? How do you steward those spaces and those connections that are so much about something that's informal? And I think around the edges, you get into these, well, am I a mentor? Am I not? I never really thought about it like that. So I think thinking about how that language works or what it does, how it can be useful, how it's not useful, is, to me, it's interesting.
I think what I was about to say, or I'm sure what I was about to say, is going back to Bushwick when my family moved to Queens, what I saw was me. Every kid I saw just hanging out was me. And it made me want to talk to them. But approaching people you don't know, even though you might have known their parents, what's this old guy talking about? Why are you bothering with me? So I had to find an environment for them. The basement was the environment.
How did you get them to come to the basement? How did that like first day? Tell us about the first day that the place was open.
It's cold outside. Honestly, because it started in the wintertime. It's cold outside. You're standing in front of a bodega. Why? I got a place here. There's a pool table. There's music. Didn't even mention books. Just some place to get you off the street. People came in. They wanted to play pool, even when they didn't know how. They wanted to be someplace warm. And then, you start looking around and where's all these books from? A good thing, I'm in a neighborhood that's predominantly Black and Latino. Every book on the shelf was either written by a Black author or a Latin person.
Nice.
There was something they could connect to, something they could relate to. And I would sit down and tell them, hey, you know what? At 14, I was standing in front of that bodega smoking a joint. So I know what you're going through. I know what you're doing. I know why you decided not to go back to school. Because you got there, you started asking questions, and nothing related to you. There was nothing in the history book that included you in it, except Crispus Attucks. Things like that. So you kind of wonder where you came from. Did you just drop here one day and all of a sudden it was, slavery. We went from slavery to Martin Luther King to nothing. So these kids had books that they could read about growing up. And be honest, Richard Wright and James Baldwin were very helpful because they read a book that they could relate to, that made them feel like someone is aware of my situation other than myself. Those things helped a great deal. Just in the summertime, going to the park and playing ball with these guys, and then coming back to the basement. The strangest thing that happened to me, to be honest with you, was because a lot of these kids were kids of people I grew up with. I got resentment. Who do you think you are? Are you better than us? That you think you can come back here and just take our kids? I'm not taking your kids anywhere. I'm just getting them off the corner. You guys can come too. You can help. That's how people think sometimes. It's like,
So how
going
did
to
you
school.
navigate that? So tell us a little bit about that. How did you, so that's, what happened after you said? You can
I
come
heard
to-
things
what
like
are those
you moved out
conversations?
of the neighborhood, you got yourself a good job, you started going to school, you think you're better than us. And the one thing that my common denominator in all those conversations was after you, so to speak, blessed me out, you'd go, hey, can I borrow $5? Got any change you could spare? You know, because I'm the big guy now. I didn't move out of the neighborhood and come back and want to pretend I'm everybody's father. And I go, first of all, never ask me to loan you something because you have no way of giving it back to me. I'll give you $5, but that's about the end of it. And I'll look at it this way. You got $5 from me or $10 from me, and you let your kid come to the basement. No questions asked. That worked. But you tried anything to get somebody to go somewhere. MCNY, I started here wanting to show movies. I'm in the basement with a VCR and videotapes. It kept kids off the street. It kept them engaged. That's all I wanted to do. So, people say you were a mentor, and I'm like, no, I was just looking out for me because every one of those kids was me. I had the same questions in school. I've been suspended, I don't know how many times because they didn't like the question or they didn't like my response to it. These kids are going through the same thing. In fact, I'm in MCNY with adults, and there's some kids, some adults here going through the same issues because there's no one to talk to. There's no one to connect with. So it's kind of like the same thing all over again. That's why one of the reasons why I wanted to join Michael's campaign, because there are so many people here who you hear everybody go, you should go to college. So you go because you think it's the good thing to do, but why are you there? What are you getting out of this? What do you want from this? What's the vision, the goal, the dream, whatever you want to call it? If I have those kids at 13 and 14 and 12 having that, it's amazing to see somebody at 35 with the same idea. Like, I'm here, but what am I doing here? What am I getting out of this? What am I going to accomplish here? There's no one here for them to talk to regarding that. That's where mentorship is important. Because people are here thinking, I'm going to get this piece of paper and the doors are going to fly open and the world's going to be better for me. And nothing changes. You might have that piece of paper, so you have changed. That's internally. The world still sees you as the same person. You still fight just as hard as you did when you were younger or before you got your diploma. If someone is there to talk to you, to kind of guide you, or at least have you think about what you really want to do and put it into motion, that's a mentor. That's what's helpful.
I like what you're saying about, the sort of, or the idea of, if you see yourself as a mentor and you understand that you're actually having the impact on somebody as to guide them, right? And that maybe puts you in the spirit of a different kind of intentionality, right? Different kind of way in which you, but I also like what you're saying. I'm also struck, Greg, how you're talking about, like, giving the parent $5 and so their kid can come to the basement. And it, to me, again, sort of touches on what we're able to do in more informal spaces. And by spaces, I mean both literal and sort of metaphysical, like that's sort of not, that kind of thing wouldn't necessarily fit in the practice of like social work or education, but that's like common sense, real life, how you navigate the actual world and actual community as you know, just sort of do what works in the moment. And I think that just to me is sort of the richness of the kind of space that you were developing, that it has that, the texture of informality, I guess I'm coming back to this idea of. And so what was a typical afternoon like for folks when they came to your space? Was it like, so you went after work?
I went every weekend.
Okay, so you went on the weekend, and
There
what
was,
was,
10 there was 10 of us and we took turns.
and so what, so people would people spend like the whole day?
Some people did. The surprising thing was getting people to read, because reading was kind of the Sunday funnies or a comic book, which I think is a great beginner because that's how I started to read. But they never read anything else. And the fact that they, like I said, I was in love with James Baldwin and those people. So it was getting people to read something that they could really relate to. My reading has changed over the course of the years, but there were things that I thought were important to them because no one else was trying to do this. They didn't have any books in their home. They had a television, in some cases a video game. And how do I say this? I read a book when I was 12. And in reading the book, I could envision the time, the place, the scenery, the smell of what was going on in this environment. I am talking to people who were telling me that they would open the book and all they saw was words, black ink on a white page. They couldn't connect the dots. They didn't get any of the scenery or anything else. I helped them get the scenery.
That's
I helped
beautiful.
them visualize what they were reading.
That's very cool. I see that Dr. Ardavini has a question or comment.
Oh, yeah, thank you. I just want to say hello to everyone. I'm Dr. Ardavini. I'm the Dean of Human Services. Lawson, we had exchanged
Yes.
emails.
We did.
I think someone had asked earlier, is this meant to find a mentor or to be a mentor? And I think that when we're talking about mentorship, many times we look to see people that look like us, right? That's not always going to happen. I was born in the Bronx. I lived in the Bronx until I was about 9 in an Italian enclave and moved up to Dutchess County to an Irish enclave. And many of my school pictures, you could see which one was not like the other. All right, you know, I was the only non-redhead, non-blonde, olive complected that can go out for recess and not have to worry about sunburn. But I was always told that mentors are all around you. My grandfather always used to say, and he didn't refer to it as mentor, but he used to say, find the person that is doing what you want to do and watch them, ask them, ask as many questions as you can about how they got there, what it took, what you need to do. So looking at that, that's what I had always done. And my mother had done the same thing. Many of our students look at me and think that I don't have a lot in common with them because here's this white Italian woman, what does she have in common with us? I'm a product of illegal immigrants. My mother was not educated. She dropped out of high school because it was an arranged marriage, and she worked in the sweatshops of Canal Street. She worked at Marist College part-time as a custodian cleaning professors' offices. It's kind of like the Rudy story, right? And she would ask the professors, what does my daughter need to do in her broken English to get where she's not doing what I'm doing? And they would always tell her, and then she would come home and say, this is what you need to do. Now, how I did that, how I would get there, I don't know, but she would keep asking the questions. How I found my undergraduate school, my mother opened a phone book. So for those of you who don't know, it used to be a book where they used to have everybody's
Yeah, I know
phone
what a
number
phone book
and
is.
addresses. You don't Google them
I
anymore.
think we're all old enough to know what a phone book is.
So she looked it up and she said, all right, which one is in driving distance? Because she can't afford to live on campus. I had athletic scholarships to go to other schools, but she needed to keep her eye on me because she knew that if I wasn't close enough for her to watch me, I'd become one of those wild children. And which was kind of true, because my second year at Marist, I earned enough money to live on campus, and I was also playing basketball. So my mother didn't want me driving so late at night after being at the school at 5 o'clock in the morning and doing 2 days of mandatory study halls and everything. So I was living on campus, and I was kind of like Kevin when he realized his family was gone in Home Alone. I was running, I have freedom now, I'm free at last. But that wore off rather quickly. And I started to look at, all right, what do I want to do? Now, there were times where I asked the wrong people advice on how to get there. I was huge into sports, and I wanted to be a sports analyst. Actually, as a kid, my dream job was to be a baseball scout. And nowadays, that's a possibility. The Yankees hired their first female general manager in the history of Yankees for their minor league this past fall. But women weren't even allowed in the locker rooms when I was going to college. So I went to my advisor, and she said, oh no, sweetheart, you have to change your major. You're not going to be a sports analyst. They won't even let you in the locker room. So I went back defeated, thinking, okay, I got the wrong person. I didn't get the one that said, maybe you could be the first. Maybe you could be the trendsetter. So you need to look and see what you're willing to do, what you're willing to sacrifice. And in the same time, also see that your behaviors are what someone else aspires to be. So you may think you're not doing anything major and you're trying to reach up to what you want to get to, but remember, there's somebody behind you thinking the same thing. You know, people may look at me and say, well, you're a dean, you're already done. You don't need a mentor anymore. We always need mentors, no matter where we are in life, because we're always experiencing something different, whether it be in our personal lives or our careers. You know, think about it like this. When you first became a parent, who did you go to? You went to other parents to ask for advice. Those were your parental mentors. You didn't ask the one that beat the crap out of their kid and the kid was a drug addict. You're not going to ask that parent. You're going to go to the parent that the kids are doing okay. Like, what did you do? How do you do it? Right? To just get this advice. And also look at our mentors are not always people that are older than us or more successful than us. I look at my own daughter, and many times I see her as a mentor. Her relentless way of setting a dream and visualizing it and using mindfulness. Now, granted, she got all that from me, but I'm just saying, like, you know, there was a progression.
Okay.
Moving forward. But those are things that we look at. I look at many of the faces that are on this screen, and I could see like Greg's just passion for books and reading and learning. Ren's relentless way of helping other students. It's just vast ideas and Natalia, like all these ideas of workshops, whether they get one student or 50 students, the vigor that they put into it and the passion that they put into it. You know, Dr. Lawadi's just passion for just spreadsheets, like, you know, looking at just some of those qualities that get there. I look at Chuck Frank and how many times he slaps me down on, oh, you academics, and sets me back into the real world. Like each and every single one of you, you know, Michael Goodwin, overcoming things that I look at and I think, oh my Lord, you know, God bless him. But also trying to push him because I see parts of myself in him where maybe there's fear of venturing out. So saying like, it's okay, run towards your fears versus away from them, because it's as you run closer to it, the clearer it is and the more you're able to manage it. So those things on mentoring and being a mentor, I think they go hand in hand. You know, it's sharing our stories that are important and not being, well, and this is what's really important that goes to me, I think, with the mentoring stuff, particularly for women and minorities, is the networking that goes along with it. All right. The old boys club, and let me clarify, the old white boys club is very healthy. All right. But there are times where we need to then reach back and share our information with others. And that's why when I always tell students, I'm going to share with you what my roadmap to success was. You could take that and mix it with other stuff that you learn from other people and create your own, because we all have our own paths. And they need to be taken on our own time. And thank you very much. I'm sorry I took up so much time.
Thank you. That's very, first of all, a little bit like an Oscar, whatever, award acceptance. So we all appreciate the night.
You like me, you really, really like me.
You're very right. I wonder if we have two of current mentors on this talk, Taisha and Crystal. Would either of you like to say anything about your experience with mentorship, maybe just in context of MCNY? You don't have to.
Hello, can
Hi.
y'all hear?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Crystal. It's my third purpose. I've been a mentor since last semester. A point that Dr. Davini brought up was that people, about the age and mentoring, I've realized I don't think people are really comfortable with me mentoring them because I'm only 21. I do have a question, like, how can I get more people to understand that even though I'm not their age, I can still be of use, I'm still helpful. It's something that I've realized has affected like the mentoring experience.
I mean, I wonder if because you know how Lawson sort of brought up this, like, I'm not a millennial and like, I'm so, like it's hard to get my mind around like navigating this new world, the world that feels new for many of us who are older. And by specifically what he's referencing there is just like using things like Moodle, like online technology.
Can I
let me, and you can correct me and jump in. But I was using you as a case in point, so it doesn't even matter if I'm not exactly accurate. But then you jump in and tell me what you mean.
So
just to say,
continue.
Just to say, I think there are a lot of people at MCNY who are, because they haven't had grown up in a world using technology in the same way that you may have, like you have something to offer in that. I didn't mean to overly speak for Lawson though, in your feelings and your experience. So go ahead.
Well, I wanted to say to Crystal, so, most of the people that I interact with just in my community, just talking to them, trying to encourage them, they are millennials. And I think that, I do find common ground, just based off of my own experiences in life and seeing, like Greg said, he goes, when he looked at those kids were him, right? So I can look at another person and I can see things that I did or places that I was in that person. You know what I mean? So I have something to touch on. So it's really about trying to find a common ground and common experiences with that person to help you be a better mentor.
Can I also, if I might, as we look at age, it's not sometimes age, sometimes it's experience, sometimes it's knowledge and skill. So all these factors then allows you the opportunity to allows you the opportunity to give someone insight because of your experiences. Your experiences are different from mine. Trust me, I can bring some individuals and who are 19 and have experienced some things in life that I couldn't fathom, right? Because that is what their path in life was. We have some individuals who at 19 have 20 some years old are in doctoral programs, right? So you know what I mean? So it's just so much of what you experienced in your life. And then again, we look at exposure, we look at guidance, we look at all these things that mentors do. And Dean Artavini, you're so correct with, it's not necessarily ethnicity. That's one factor as it relates to that subject matter or to that life experiences, but there's so many other variables that come into play when we look for someone to guide us, or we're in a position to guide others, right? I've worked with many diverse socioeconomic individuals in various organizations where it was my knowledge, I would say knowledge, skill, experience that comes from working in workforce development for so long, that really was put me in a position to give advice, to give an understanding, and to give some methods by which and strategy by which an individual can pursue whatever their dreams or address some lifestyle issues. So, all of that. So it's not necessarily because you're younger than me, you can't give me insight. Truthfully, you can. There's a lot that you can tell me, as I'm looking to do some work with, my son is a high school student athlete. I'm really looking to do some work with the student athletes in high school who are really falling behind academically, because people don't realize that some of you may have been athletes, that between schoolwork, practice, and all these other things, that academics is really more challenging just your average person. So, so I don't, so how do you, as a 21-year-old, what's your approach? What is it that's inviting to you? What is it that you're more receptive to, right? So in other words, you can help me in that process, so there's always information you have that can help someone regardless sometimes of the age, ethnicity, or gender. It's your personal experience or knowledge that you've gained throughout your life that you want to share with someone. And real quick, Lawson, what part of Staten Island? I lived in Staten Island for
I live in West Brighton, Trinity Place.
Yeah, I lived in West Brighton too. We'll talk later. Okay.
Thank you, Michael.
Crystal, Mike's correct in that it's your approach, right? I've been in front of the college classroom since I was 23. I finished my PhD when I was 25. So wow. I'm now then going into the classes. If you met my mother, you would understand.
Did you start college at 12?
I started my undergraduate at 16. So I was here ahead. So I experienced a lot of that resistance, and I had to remember that, especially if I had older students, many times I was either the same age as the students or just a little bit older. And then if I had what was considered a non-traditional student, and one of the things that I did is I would never refer to older students as non-traditional. I would always say, you come to class, you pay your tuition just like everybody else, you're a student. All right. And I would always stress everybody has their own path. I just had an Italian mother that was a dictator, and I wasn't allowed to veer and create, so it was very much, this is what you do and this is how you do it. But the other thing is also recognize and say, I'm not saying I know more than you do. I just have a little bit more experience. I'm where you want to be. So let me help you get there. Let's learn from each other, because I'm sure there are some things that you know that I don't know because of your ability to have that experience. And also recognize that by no fault of your own, you're holding up a mirror to someone who sees that, oh God, did I screw up my life because I should have gotten my degree at that age and I didn't because I veered off, or I did A, B, and C. And they see that as a fault. You can't control that. All right. What you can do is recognize and just admit everybody has their own path. I'm just here to help you get where you need to get. So you use me. Let me give you my experience and let me get you where you want to be. And be very respectful in that, because that mirror can also be the thing that turns them away from continuing, right? That's why at Metropolitan, many students that either go off and have another career and then come back feel more comfortable, because they're not older than everybody by 20 or 30 years. Everybody's around the same age, or everybody has a very similar story. So, you know, it's that camaraderie, that cohort that we have. You just recognize it and be respectful of it. And you're going to meet with resistance. I'm going to tell you, the first 3 or 4 years of my teaching class, either as a TA or as a professor, there were many tears that were shed after class, because I was challenged much more so. Like, how do you know? You probably weren't even born yet. Or like, I would get those snide comments. And also being a woman, right, and teaching maybe a social problems class or gender issues or gender theory. Many times I would say, well, these are what the experts say in this. And they were like, well, who is the author on that? And I would say it was a female. And they were like, oh, of course she would say that, right? But then I would have my male counterpart saying the same thing, and nobody questioned that. That's the isms that people bring into the class with them. The only thing is that you can try to dispel them, but as respectfully as possible. And you may get all of them, you may not get all of them, but you just have to stay true to yourself.
I want to just jump
Crystal,
in and give.
I would like for Crystal to be my mentor. I would definitely appreciate if we could link up and she can be.
Oh,
my mentor.
absolutely. I will.
Yeah.
I took your
If that's
name,
okay with you,
and I will
Crystal.
link you up with Crystal, if you're up for that, Crystal. That would be
Yes.
awesome. We have 9 minutes left, and we have this, those of us who are on staff have a meeting at 1. And I just want to give a moment for Taisha to jump in if she feels like that before we do a wrap up, because she's another one of our mentors.
Thanks, Kate, and hello, everyone. So I would say that I have a different experience because I've been with student services from about 2019, first starting with the SAP Success Program. And it differed in mentorship from just regular mentorship, because we had a set goal when it comes to SAP, as far as raising your average and remaining compliant in order to receive your funding. So it's different that way, but it's still mentorship. And what I feel that worked best for me is motivational interviewing. So just to let you know, if you're not because of my field, I use it in my line of work. But if you're not familiar, it's basically open-ended questions to elicit information from people in a way that is comfortable for them. So it's not so much of hey, you're here getting mentoring, what, specific questions that are, it's more so like, hey, how's your day? What have you been going through? Like, is there a particular class or a professor that's giving you some some fever or pushback or whatever? And then we have discussions from there. So it's very much student led, and it's not every conversation, every meeting, every part about goal setting is student led. And that's what I've just learned, to give that process over to the student. And it's not so much for me to gauge whether how well I'm doing based on how many people I've interacted with, or if they've actually called me back. I think the biggest part of mentorship is just being available, being there, being present, so that when someone does need your help, that you're able to give it, whether it's you directly or you linking them to someone, because that's another expectation not to put on yourself. You might not know the answers to their specific question, but chances are you do know who to, hand them off to. Or maybe you can think about a time as in your role as a student, because now I've graduated. So, but back then I can think about, okay, when I had this assignment or when I was in this purpose, this is how I felt. So if you are, putting yourself in a position to empathize and remember when you were there, it's like, when you were there, what would you have liked to happen for you? Right. So if I was struggling with the assignment, what would I have liked to happen? And of course, it's like sometimes just a magical fairy to explain it in a different way that's not so scholarly. Or maybe it was just somebody to print something for me, that can like just printing something, because I work in the office. Nobody's monitoring what papers I print out, but I can print out something for a student that they might not be able to print out for themselves. So this is, it's not, for me, mentorship is just showing up, being there. When I get the email, did I reply? When I got the text, did I reply? When it was time for a phone call, was I there? If it was a Zoom, was I on the Zoom? That's basically what mentorship is for me. And
I love how you're, I'm nudging us towards because we have just a few
Yes,
minutes and it's
sorry.
gonna be a hard stop, but I love what you're sort of centering is empathy, right? And that's the humanity in it. Leslie, did you have something you want to jump in on? Do you have anything to add?
Hi, everyone. Yes, I know you're getting ready to conclude. I just was wanting to concur with what everyone was saying. This is such a powerful conversation. It's so important. What the dean was saying, the professor, Greg, salute to you. Mentoring is caring. Like this young lady that was just speaking was saying, is being there and showing up and being present. To the young lady, Crystal, just showing them that you care, establishing a rapport of trust, okay? It doesn't matter that you're younger. If they feel that they can trust you and that you are there, that you have the ear for them, the trust factor will flow and you will be able to help them, assist them, lead them, coach them, guide them. Mentoring is all those things. It's multi-layered. It's fascinating. And so thank you for the conversation. That was it. Thank you.
That's wonderful. And it's a great place to begin to wrap up. We have just a few more minutes. I'm sorry for barking in on people and cutting them off a touch. I'm trying to facilitate, but I'm a little clumsy sometimes. Greg, do you have anything you want to say?
I want to say to Crystal, I'm in my 60s. And one of the people who I talk to the most, one of the people who's mentoring me right now, is my youngest daughter. But
There
we
you
can
go.
talk about anything and everything all the time.
There you go. And just to sort of wrap up then and have some closure, this was a wonderful conversation. It's the beginning of a 3-part series or 3-month series that's going to be devoted to Black history in a very loose interpreting that very loosely. Next month's conversation is going to be about parenthood, motherhood specifically, and mothering and parenting. And then we're going to have in March a conversation about reading. Alumni who has a book club it's a Black women read political books themed book club, is going to join us to lead a conversation in March for Women's History. So thank you everyone for coming. I really encourage you to get involved with our mentoring program. If you need a mentor, if you want a mentor, or if you just want to kind of think about what mentorship can look like at MCNY, let us know. And I would like to just end very quickly with, again, a plug for libraries, not even specifically our library, as places where that kind of messy, informal learning can take place, that has books around, but nobody's forcing you to read them. Like Greg described, and I would, kind of wanted to hear from Greg, and maybe another time, like, how can we here at MCNY learn from what he did in his space to be really centering what students need in any given moment in a elastic way.